So welcome to another What's Current podcast by NAPIT. And today we're looking at all things renewables. And I'm joined by Sam Featherstone from Oval Renewables. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
No problem.
Bit excited about this one because you know I'm really passionate about renewables.
Yeah.
And you're involved in design, install on some fairly wide-ranging installs you've done over the years.
Yeah, lots of different things. Yeah, we've done a lot of different scenarios and covered a lot of the country doing it as well.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how your journey was into that. So, you know, was it starting with like a basic apprenticeship in electrics and then that sort of got into this? So tell us a little bit about yourself and how it all started.
Yeah, so I've got Oval Renewables as a company. We're based in York, but it all, like with many business owners, started from kind of straight out of school, not really knowing what I wanted to do. And the whole apprenticeship route was kind of an unspoken thing at school. It was all what you're doing at sixth form, what you're doing at university, and all of that. And my dad's a joiner, and I knew I definitely didn't want to do joinery because I didn't want him looking over my shoulder. But he was the one that really put me into looking at a trade, because I think it was in my blood really from him, and I did enjoy making things and messing about with stuff really. He used to mend his power tools and things like that when the lead needed changing and things. So that kind of got me going, and I went and I did an open day at JTL training, and went there and just loved the whole environment. Felt like I was being sort of spoken to like an adult, which was quite nice, and just saw all these rigs where you're building things and testing things and what have you, which is really good. But I decided very late that I wanted to do it. I'd already signed up to sixth form and everything like that, and to get onto the JTL apprenticeship you need to be employed. So my dad got his wish, and I actually got employed by him, and I was putting stud walls up. But
Sparky apprentice dealing with wood.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of had a bit of a baptism into the joinery side, and I'd always worked with my dad on the tools. But JTL and myself and my dad, we were looking for electricians to take me on. So I got taken on then by an electrical company in Scarborough, who I then started doing sort of basic first fixing in domestic properties, a little bit of small scale commercial stuff, but just with I think 2 or 3 people on the books, and just got me into that environment. But I did feel until that point that I was kind of a fraud at college, because I was doing joinery stuff, but a lot of it was health and safety, and I was putting loads of work in on a night trying to make sure I was ahead of all the theory side of stuff that we were learning at college, because of that kind of feeling of being a bit of a fraud. But it developed from there, and did the majority of my apprenticeship there in standard electrical work, and then the feed-in tariff came around.
Oh, okay.
The feed-in tariff came, and if we remember back to that, it was sort of 40 odd pence a kilowatt hour just for whatever you generated.
Yeah,
so
it was a lot, wasn't it? Really?
It was. Yeah. When we look back, it's kind of too much.
I think.
If it was set at like 15p, 16p, where it was kind of matched the import rate at the time, I think that would have been a good level. But they were trying to stimulate the industry, and it did that. It really took off almost overnight. And so, a bit like a few companies now, really setting up and seeing this sort of solar boom. Back then, it was a similar case, and the company I worked for, we did 1 or 2 solar jobs, then we did 3 or 4 in a week, and then suddenly they were really scaling up almost to be just a solar installations company. And so just by kind of just being dragged along with that, I started doing solar PV installations during the feed-in tariff era, and didn't have any kind of real passion for it at that point, because I was just a 16-year-old trying to work out what the heck a bit of twin and earth was at that point. But as soon as we started doing it, it really intrigued me to think that we can generate energy from the sun, and it's just even in the UK we don't have same as like Spain and Australia, but we still get some sun and it's light. We're able to generate our own power, and as a Yorkshireman thinking, wow, people are saving a lot of money here, like that really appealed to me, and that has carried through all the way through to today, really.
That's amazing, because when you think about it, like you say, the sort of, you wasn't a fraud, by the way. It's a different route. Well, but what normally, the normal route, if there is a normal route, would be sort of you do your time with your power and lighting, which you would have done. You would have done those jobs. But you hit that market really early, at an early age, didn't you?
Yeah.
Which stood you in good stead, really, to where you are now. Because if you think about your journey, you've known renewables for a very long time and saw you must have saw the changes in standards, in equipment. Even the modules back then would have been of a lesser quality and efficiency, but you've seen that whole journey, which is fantastic.
It's been really interesting. I mean, now our standard panel output is about 430 watts.
That's mad, isn't it? Yeah.
And I remember lifting up and fitting 180 watt panels.
Yeah.
And also it was before transformerless inverters came in. So it was when you had inverters that had transformers in. And I remember the Sunny Boys lifting the Sunny Boys inverters in. And obviously I was 16 as well, and thought you could lift anything kind of thing. And you lifted trying to get these Sunny Boy inverters up high level on a pair of steps, and you kind of like shaking to lift it up. And then the transformerless inverters came in, and suddenly they were just so light. And kind of like, this is such a massive leap in technology, but even just trying to track the regs through that, as I was learning about the regs at college, and looking at the I'm going to get this word wrong. It's like galvanic separation or something like that. You got it bang on. Pretty much well done. And working out how that works when you haven't got a transformer doing that. And what if type B RCDs are needed and all this stuff. And so I think it helped the company I worked for as well, because I was right in that with doing my apprenticeship. And so at college we had the time to look into all that. So I even remember back in those times having a chat to my employer, and them asking a bit of my advice on it, because I was right in the cusp of learning it all for the first time. You
need the underpinning theory knowledge of it, didn't you? Yeah. So that makes you a good designer in a way, to understand systems.
And it helped them, because we all know as business owners, other people are running their businesses. You've got so many other things to think about, and I'm in that situation now where I've got to think about jobs coming in, pricing, health and safety, all these different things. And so even though you would like to get into the latest release on an inverter that's come out, you've got a stack of other things you've got to do before you spend some time looking at that. But when I was an apprentice, my full role was learning how to be an electrician, learning about the regs. And so it meant that I was literally going there one day a week to learn about the regs. So it helped my company, I think, the company I worked for, because they could focus on some of the other bits, and I could just get the book and go, what do you think about this? And it actually collaboratively helped the company I worked for get to a point where we were making sure everything was fitted to regulations. So it all sort of timed quite well, but there's definitely been a huge shift away from like I say, the transformer inverters and things like that,
the
module sizes, fixing systems, optimization, and it's just interesting to see over the next 5-10 years where it then goes, and we'll be maybe sat here 10 years older looking back at when we did the podcast about where we started and now where we're at. So
that's one thing that fascinates me, is the technology is moving so quickly. It's like and that's really where sort of publications, advice, support, guidance, regulations can't almost keep up, because I see the industry being very much manufacturer driven, because there's a new product which we look at and we go, oh, that's good. Remember the days of EV charging, when sort of you had Rolex as the only players in the game, and we were all fitting earth electrodes because it was the norm, and then we had unicorn devices that said they did this and the other, and then suddenly they existed and we no longer fit earth electrodes. So I think the same happens in the renewables. What's interesting, Sam, you said there when you had that journey of renewables very early, when did it turn into you as a company? When did you make that switch to go and do it on your own?
Anyone that's been in the industry a while and that was in it when the feed-in tariff was around will remember the peaks and troughs in demand, because it used to be people had been thinking about getting solar for 6 months to a year, and then suddenly the government would release a note to say, by the way, in 6 months' time or a year's time, the feed-in tariff is dropping down, and it had like this staged drop.
They almost halved it eventually, didn't they?
Yeah,
to sort of 20.
I think when I got mine at my house, I think I was on 13p per kilowatt hour that we generated. But it was the point where it made the industry quite unstable, because you'd have a steady amount of work. They would then announce that the feed-in tariff was dropping, so the amount of work would go through the roof, and we were trying to fit as many jobs as we could. And then after that drop, it would be dead for a bit, and then it would start to kind of get back steady again, and then they'd release the next drop, it'd get really busy again, and then it'd drop. So you were in this really weird situation, and that wasn't necessarily my concern as an employee, but I could see that it was happening, because we were doing longer days and things. And then the feed-in tariff pretty much disappeared. It was ticking around, I think, at around 4p per kilowatt hour generated. So still getting paid to generate, but it was much lower
next to
rate.
nothing. Yeah.
And at that point, the company I worked for decided to kind of shut up shop. So it didn't go bust or anything like that. They just kind of went, we've had our time in it. We're going to just...
Oh, okay. They folded. Yeah.
So I got made redundant, as well as the plumbers, and because they had like some renewable heating stuff, and they kind of just decided to let it all kind of shut down. And so I got £3,000 redundancy money, and I was at that point where even when I was employed, I was thinking I could maybe have a go at this myself and start a company up. I've always been quite ambitious, and so I thought, well, you know what? I've got £3,000. I'm going to put that into a company. I'm going to start that journey, and I created Oval Electrical, and we just trying to get some money in. So doing back to general sparking, domestic sparking.
Get some turnover into the company.
Just get some money coming in, really, and learn about invoicing and all these other things, because renewables is quite paperwork heavy to get that, and it's quite daunting when you first set up as a new business owner as well to go into all that. So I decided just to do it as electrical, Oval Electrical, but wanted to kind of shift the scales back to just doing renewables.
That was always the aim.
Got the taste for it, and I knew that was where my passion was. So in a way, I got to know what my passion was very early, which was I'm quite thankful for. And it went really well. I was subbing into a lot of companies, and then we made the switch to go, you know what, if we're going to compete for renewable work for ourselves, we need to change the name so that we're because we were competing against other, this renewables, that renewables, and then we were coming in as electrical, and I just thought it didn't really sit right when they were looking at the
customers would have seen that, wouldn't they? And thought, are they renewables? Yeah.
Is he serious in this industry? So we changed the name to Oval Renewables, went limited, and all the rest of it, and just sort of rolled the dice with trying to start doing that. So that was, what would that be, 4 years ago now, something like that. So
nice timing as well then, because you've caught the beginning of this boom, haven't you? Really, because me and you have spoken before, and I'm almost in awe of it now. I've been off the tools, over a decade now, and I sort of missed that. I saw the first. The feed-in tariff, and I remember, actually, funny you should say that, there was a big housing association in the Midlands that when the government were giving this 40p, they were quite clever. The local councils agreed all social housing was suddenly having panels on left, right, and centre. And then when the government went, we've set the benchmark a bit high to attract it, and then I think they literally halved it almost very quickly. And then all these contracts just got wiped out completely. So I sort of started to get into it and didn't. And as I would have loved to have been in that market, but I see it from afar now with people like yourself and others. But I think now, the curve or the growth of it is just like nothing I've ever seen. If you're a young electrician coming out your training, or you're excited, or like you were, you knew your passion was in renewables, the world's your oyster, really, isn't it? A little bit.
Yeah, and I think it'll make up a lot of people's standard work now, which I suppose could be seen a little bit worrying for companies that just specialise in it. But I think it will become the norm for companies to do rewires, EV chargers, commercial fit outs, solar PV, battery storage kind of thing.
Bit of smart homes, perhaps as
smart
well.
home, and kind of bring it more into the general wave of or general scope of people's work. But what's nice about the industry now is that I don't feel like we're in the same area with these high peaks and these low troughs of relying on the feed-in tariff to stimulate work. We're kind of in that steady growth of, yes, energy prices do stimulate it up and down, like the whole Ukraine thing and all the other kind of stuff happening in the world. That can peak demand, because if energy prices go up, people then seriously look at how to self-generate and things. But I feel like as a world, we're moving to that renewable area anyway. So the end point is over here, and we're over here, and we're making our way towards it. It's just how fast we get there. So I don't feel like it'll ever go away, no matter what the energy prices do. But for us as a company, like you said, we are in a really good position, because we learned how to do all the MCS stuff, all of the high stuff, all of the other other background things, when it was actually quite difficult to sell solar before this energy boom, if you like. Whereas companies entering the market now have got to try and do that whilst being in the trenches of being really busy about trying to fix it. We could do it as quickly as we could, but we weren't absolutely snowed under with, you know, multiple installs a week and this, that, and the other. We could do it more leisurely to work out exactly how to do all of the MCS side of things, which helped us a lot to get to where we are.
Yeah, you've learnt very early adopters, haven't you? Like you say, it might be more difficult for people now that don't want to use the word jump on that bandwagon or that phrase, but I just have. So it is a little bit like people see it, I can do that, but they don't realise, like you said, what goes on in the background to get where you've got as a company.
Yeah,
I think
it shouldn't deter people from doing it.
No.
It just means that you're probably slightly more up against it, and it'll have to be a steeper learning curve than maybe what we experienced, because we weren't as busy as at that point, because the market wasn't as busy when we were learning how to do it.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I just love the growth, and I think you're right. I don't think it will be this steep climb. I think, you know, the carbon neutral thing is not going anywhere because it's government driven. Whichever, you know, let's not make it political because that will bore everyone to death on a podcast, but it is government driven, and you know, they are delaying. You can see whoever gets in next might either delay that further, but in a way that helps us get there a bit more steady for the infrastructure of things like, you know, all homes need to have certain amounts of renewables, you know, whether it's heat pumps, solar, battery. You know, that's good for installers and for designers to do it properly. We don't want it suddenly to boom, because that creates a little bit of a race to the bottom as well, doesn't it?
It does. Now, like I just said, I think the train has already left the station with where we're going to, on the way towards fitting more renewable stuff. So these little roadblocks that, you know, political parties might try and delay to ease certain voters, you know, concerns on the whole green thing, it's minor compared to we were already on that way. And so when I see, you know, them playing around with like the electric vehicle delay, so that, you know, they're gonna, I think it was an extra 5 years.
That's right.
You know, a lot of these big manufacturers of EVs are already going to get towards 2030 anyway.
Of course they are.
And so an extra 5 years, they're saying, well, we're already going to get there 2030, so it's fine.
No.
So a lot of it's political, but like you say, we're not going to go too dive into that.
No, we don't want to do that. Now, let's bring us back up to where we are now. Sort of like, you know, so you've been up and established and running and doing this for a long time, and your content that you put out on social media has always been great, honest, and it's really good for someone like me that's been off the tools to see that. But behind the scenes of the YouTube stuff, you know, what are some of the issues that you're encountering as a designer installer of these systems? Because, you know, we all know from any kind of electrical installation, things sometimes just don't go well, and that might be due to not understanding particular guidance or standards, or the piece of kit you purchased. Give us sort of the main ones that you find as a team and as a company.
Yeah, I think the one thing is that it's not always an even playing field, and I think one thing that we not struggle with, but we put a lot of effort into letting customers know, is that not everybody will be quoting for the right equipment. So, for example, just something simple that we all know as electricians, volt drop things, looking at the 1% thing rather than it just being 3 or 5%. You know, because even on a long run of cable, we might be specing a 16 mil, but our competitor might be doing it on a 6 mil, something like that.
It makes a difference.
And it makes a difference over a 30-metre run, or you know. So look at things like that. But when we look at more the manufacturing side of things, we had a case where this particular battery storage system that we were fitting didn't have a neutral earth bond link.
Okay, yeah.
And it was working on a isolating transformer, like an IT system, and it had a lot of it worked on like the floating voltage system when it went into backup mode, and it caught us a bit by surprise, because like with a lot of electricians, we trust that the equipment that we're fitting is compliant to our regulations, and whilst we're the designers and ultimately it comes on to us, we're all busy, and you know, it's a bit like buying a double socket and finding that doesn't meet regulations. You think, well, why the heck have I been sold it? And so that caught us out a little bit by surprise. So we worked with the manufacturer on that and raised a few points back and forth. A lot of this stuff is China driven, and it's like we were speaking about, it's equipment made for a global market, and things like the pen protection and all this sort of stuff, and in this case the neutral earth bond link, the IT system is fine for a lot of the world. It's just for us, it's kind of frowned upon in the UK, and so that causes some issues, and the company ended up sending us any jobs that had the battery fitted with like a backup system. they changed it under warranty for us, so that the neutral earth bond link was there. But that caught us out by surprise. So it's and that caused us to look deeper at other systems that we're fitting to make sure what we've assumed. Assumption is always the start of any problem, but any equipment that we now fit, we look at those particular points. But it is difficult when you're in the business to completely be all over that.
Yeah, and one of the things we do when we do any presentations on this, and funnily enough, we were doing an ELEX this month, is you know, I've been doing a presentation of the first thing I put up there, which normally bores everyone to death, is BS 7671, getting into section 551, obviously into part 8, codes of practice for these systems, and MCS documents, and you know, you do your homework and look into it. I mean, we first spoke a few years ago at Solar and Storage Live when I did that little bit of a presentation. It was interesting. We had a lot of installers sat there, didn't we? About 30 or 40 installers, and I was asking questions about what about earth electrodes, and it was news to some people, which in a way shocked me, but I live in a different world, and I think, we spoke before, there might be a little bit of a disconnect, excuse another electrical pun, they always happen in podcasts, there's a little bit of a disconnect between people responsible for writing the standards of the code of practice and educating, like you say, the manufacturers of the equipment, and you guys on the ground designing and installing these systems. I think it's getting better, but that conversation needs to be better, doesn't it? Because if you don't know, you don't know. You're quite right. As the installer, ultimately, you're responsible for that installation. But sometimes, you know, in a court of law, that's not going to stand ground. You know, you can't say, I didn't know, Your Honour. Yeah. But actually, what we have got to do is sort of get together around the table and say, look, if that manufacturer is only concerned with selling to a global market and it's about selling that particular inverter, then fine, go and do your thing. But the ones that are prepared to listen to comply with UK regulations, are tricky earthing systems and not having things like floating voltages, I think that is a real problem for you on the ground, isn't it?
It is. And I think there has been a bit of a view from all these different areas, like the manufacturers, the installers. We just want to look after our little bit, you know, and manufacturers are like that a little bit and go, yeah, we'll have a look at the regs, but this is basically what our system does, and we want to see how much we can sell it for and what have you. And I'm not saying it's as brutal as that, but what I get the feeling is that people want to look after their little bit, and then anything else is everyone else's responsibility. And I think there is a disconnect between manufacturers, installers, people that are writing and advising on the regulations, when actually it wants to be, if you speak to the majority of electricians, we all want to make the industry better, safer, and easier to comply with. Because we all want to comply with the regulations. It's just that, you know, electricians watching this will know that you read a regulation 10 times and you're none the wiser sometimes as to what actually happens. You know, what the actual rule or regulation is telling you. Yeah. And so we all want to try and make that clearer. And I am a firm believer that people want to do a good job. Yeah. People want to do a good job, but they maybe haven't received the right training or misunderstood parts of it. They may be under a lot of time pressure from their boss or their customer or whatever. And then there may be, you know, the cost pressures as well with having to undercut. But if you get these little things sorted, I feel like everybody wants to do a job, stand back and go, I've done the best job I've got here. Yeah. And I think it's those different pressures that cause people to rush, cut corners, you know, that ultimately then make bad things happen.
I think you're right. I mean, you're always going to get your charlatans in the industry, aren't you? You know, that's any trade. Yeah, of course you are. But I think you're right. The majority want to do a good job. And when we do a little bit of a hands-up situation when we're presenting, I always say, how many are thinking of getting into it? How many are doing it? And, you know, it's varied, you know, how many are doing it. But the ones that want to, they want, like you said, they want the right training. And I always say to them, don't do a CPD course, don't do something you've seen online, you know, get a regulated qualification, because you'll understand the underpinning knowledge of these systems. You know, it can look shiny on YouTube, can't it? You know, not having a go at, obviously, the content people put on. But actually, I like it when you see content where people explain the component parts. Because to me, I'm a bit of a geek like that, and I feel like you're a little bit of the same. We're electrical geeks. We want to understand the why. Where the annoying apprentices used to go, why is that? Why is that? Why is that? And I think we should ask these questions before we dive into things, because one of the things you mentioned there, Sam, was safety. And I think that's probably the primary, well, there's no two ways about it. Any electrical installation, and especially renewables when we're dealing with DC, safety has got to be that primary concern, because especially things like fire safety, we're seeing instances in other parts of the world and in this country where we're, badly installed systems, not necessarily the equipment, or it could be the equipment if it's some spurious rubbish they bought off the internet. But through the MCS accreditation, you've got to use that type tested equipment that they say you've got to use. So I think we don't want to race to the bottom, but tell us a little bit more about some of the sort of safety concerns, fire safety in particular.
Yeah, so for me, I'm sort of treating this as a mark in the sand, because I've been banging on about this for a little while now, and I find it very strange that in this day and age we are still allowing DC, unisolatable DC, come into someone's property, even if they turn off the main switch, pull the main fuse, if it's during the day, and that property has got that commercial building, that domestic property has got a standard solar PV system, a standard string inverter system, that we could have anywhere between 200 to up to 1,000 volts on some live DC cables just swinging in the wind, depending on what's happening.
Crazy, yeah.
So for me, the whole fire safety thing, I think, with obviously the terrible scenes that take place like Grenfell, and unfortunately, I think, like it always is the case with regulations, they follow a disaster.
Yeah.
And I feel like...
So normally loss of life, isn't it?
Yeah,
and suddenly we do something about it.
Yeah, and it is. And I feel like it's probably going to take something like that to happen for the industry to really look at, well, is there not a technology where we can isolate that DC up on the roof and keep it locked out the way, or tracking arcs? And this isn't obviously a plug for any technology or anything. We use Solar Edge because they've got that DC safe function
that's built into the
optimizer. So every and the inverter, but the optimizers basically will lock that voltage per panel. So it'll only allow 1 volt coming down per panel. So if you've got a 10 panel system, you'll have 10 volts coming down to the inverter, unless the inverter says all safe to go on.
Yeah.
If you had a standard string inverter and you had an open circuit voltage per panel of 40 volts, you've got 400 volts there that is just sat there waiting for the inverter to do something with it.
Yeah.
So for me, I feel like the regulations need to change to go, you know what, we don't want that voltage sat there until it's ready to be used. And so that is, there's other manufacturers, there's people like Tego, there's 3 or 4, I think, from memory, so it's not just Solar Edge, but that is a real place that we could overnight basically...
That's a quick fix, isn't it?
Quick fix. It's literally an extra box on the back of a panel, which it cost us installers, it's maybe an extra 40 quid a panel. So it's an extra chunk on the job, but equally, if everybody has to include that within their job, then it just means that everyone's prices go up by a few hundred quid. And it's not really much more installation time. And there's other benefits through logging of panel efficiencies, making sure all the panels are working correctly.
Shading factors and all that.
There's other benefits. It's not just the fire safety side. And that brings us on to the whole DC isolator topic.
We're going there, folks. We're going there.
So...
your thoughts on it?
My thoughts on it are, and I think firstly, conversation is good. So whether or not you're advocating for removing them or you're advocating for, like I am, for keeping them, that conversation is fantastic, because that's the only way that we meet kind of in the middle, and kind of put the word out there rather than kind of just sticking to your own side. I feel like the conversation has to be had. For me, just as a general standpoint, even if it wasn't DC, if it was AC, reducing the amount of points of isolation seems a weird way of going into a decision on if to remove something. Just going, we're going to remove that because
it could be a point of failure.
Point of failure. It's a point of failure, and it costs the customer a little bit more for us to install that isolator. For me, that would be a byproduct of a deeper decision to remove it, where you go, and by the way, it removes a bit of cost from the job if we do remove them. There needs to be a deeper reason why we remove them. For me, being able to isolate that voltage, I know it's still coming into that isolator at 400 volts potentially, but to isolate that voltage into an inverter so you can work on those cables going into that inverter dead seems like such a logical thing, and I don't fully understand the reason why people want to get rid of the DC isolators, because yes, it's a point of failure, like the AC isolator is, like the generation meter is,
like any connection is,
the MCB is, like the RCBO is, whatever you're fitting. I don't feel like that is an adequate reason to remove it. as long as it's been terminated correctly. I think we need to tighten up on how people are terminated. We do inspections, and you go and literally the cable's been jammed in. There's strands poking out and nearly touching other strands from the positive and negative. Nearly touching. You think, oh my, a little bootlace ferrule going on that. You sorted, and that's not to say that is the only reason why those isolators will fail. Of course they'll fail. That is a risk. The isolators will fail. Certainly if they're operated a lot, or there's a manufacturing error, or these things.
The right one's not been selected for loading, so it could be a number of factors.
Loads of factors, but I don't think we should use that to remove what I feel like is quite an important point of isolation. I know we were discussing about, obviously some inverters have a direct screwed terminal for the DC as well. So if you haven't got that isolator, how are you working on that cable? Dead.
Could be your only point of isolation could be on the roof, couldn't it? Or in the loft, or
it's basically removing an MC4 from that string.
Which doesn't make sense to me at all.
No, because if you haven't got a scaffold there, you haven't got easy roof access. If you're on a pitched roof, like most domestic ones are, you're having to remove a panel, which instantly then is a 2-person job. You're probably having to get a full scaffold, a tower scaffold at best, which is a couple of £100 for the hire of that. You're having to remove a panel. You remove the panel and the blooming end clamp breaks or whatever, and then suddenly you're into deeper. And all you wanted to do is replace the inverter or do some alterations, and suddenly it's such an involved job. And then actually you've cost the customer a lot more because they've had to pay for a scaffold. They've had to pay for you to return with the end clamp or mid clamp that you've broken. All these different things. You've had another person on the job, and so suddenly that £20 per isolator that you've paid for doesn't even cover the scaffold that you've had to do to get up to the roof to safely isolate. So
from a practical point of view, it's just, again, I think we spoke before, and actually any electrical installation, including renewables, especially when we're dealing with DC, is we've always said that your first design consideration is safety, not cost, not time saving. And like you say, for the sake of a 40-50 quid isolator that's not going to take you that long, it seems like a no-brainer. Just for our listeners and watchers that are unsure of what we're actually talking about, if you're new to this, is what they've said in an RC62 document is they've said that if we're talking about inverters fitted with an isolation on the actual inverter, so it's integrated.
Some of them have it built in.
So and then we're saying, well, in that circumstance, is there a requirement for an external one? We're both in agreement that we would still have those. So, it's a big conversation, like you say, in the industry at the moment, whether they are or not. But most installers I've spoke to, including you, would say we're still fitting them, because that point of failure, like you've highlighted, might not necessarily be the equipment. If it's a good reputable company that's a good at DC isolator, it's going to be installation error for me. It's going to be, like you said, loose connections, strands sticking out, or not understanding what a DC voltage is, because you've got your jumper leads in there. How many electricians are getting that and going, oh, why are these in here, and flinging them out? Our inspections team have seen it all weird and wonderful ways. These things have been connected. We've even seen AC isolators fitted on the DC side. And the suppression of that arc needs to be across certain poles. So, to me, it seems like a no-brainer. If I want to work on that, and the regs are very clear, actually, it does say, I can't remember the exact reg, I haven't got it in front of me, but the regs say it's required on the AC side and the DC side, and then it goes on further to say on the DC side it needs to be a circuit breaker or a switch disconnector. Now, realistically, you're not going to use a circuit breaker on the DC side. Maybe on bigger installs you might do, but it's going to be a switch disconnector, which, there you go. It's quite clear what you need to use in that circumstance. So I think we're in agreement on that one. All right then, folks, this has been a nice long podcast. So what we've decided to do, we've decided to split it into two, a second parter. So we're going to end part one here, but look out for part two straight after, where we're going to talk more with Sam and Oval Renewables about some of the wonderful stuff that's going on in the world of renewables. Thanks for listening.